Thank you so much for that very humbling introduction. The story that Jeff has presented to us is sobering because that was 60 years ago. Now the EU was established so that there may not be another war, that there may be unity in Europe. But this month's Foreign Affairs magazine, the current, which is on the book stands, has several articles on the question whether the rise of China would lead to a Third World War. And the background of it is, one of the backgrounds is Niall Ferguson's book, The Ascent of Money, which is his British citizen who's teaching economics at Harvard and is gaining a lot of influence in the intellectual community. He is the intellectual guru for many of the anchor persons such as Fareed Zakaria and CNN. In the Time magazine 6 weeks ago, March 14th, when Fareed Zakaria argued that America is in decline and should be destroyed as the only basis for a possibility of rebuilding, the creative destruction. Only when Germany was destroyed could it be rebuilt, so America should be destroyed before it can be rebuilt. He argues, Ferguson argues in The Ascent of Money, that the stage is set because of the globalization of finance for another war. The First World War and the Second World War were results of globalization of finance, is one of the arguments, and a similar stage is set. Schumann and his two other Roman Catholic friends were able to talk about building Europe, rebuilding Europe, building peace, thankfully because they were not contaminated by Protestant eschatology, and particularly American eschatology. They could not have dreamt of building Europe, rebuilding Europe, if they had studied in Fuller Theological Seminary, because American evangelicalism cannot even define what a nation is. If when God says, I will make you a great nation, if that means that you will have lots of children, and a nation means a people group, ethnicity, then this vision of steel and coal production, having cooperation across the borders and building great and prosper, a land flowing with milk and honey, doesn't fit that picture. So, as Schumann Center begins to face this reality, recovering the dream of 60 years ago of building a great Europe, a peaceful Europe, a blessing to Africa, a blessing to the nations of the earth, which was God's promise to Abraham, that I will make you a great nation, and through you I will bless all the nations. I will make all the nations great. That vision requires an understanding of what nation is. Now, thankfully, the other facet of the fact that it was three Roman Catholics who had the vision of EU was that the European Union, which should grow towards not beyond economic oneness, towards political oneness, because their understanding of nation was very different. The Protestant Reformation didn't simply break up the Roman Catholic Church. It broke up the Holy Roman Empire. the concept of nation states was born. 13 provinces in Holland, for example, becoming one nation. Now, was that a biblical understanding of what a nation is? If that was, could that be applied for all the states of Europe? Can nation be redefined? But not simply for building a great Europe, but for building a great Africa. Now, those are the issues, I think, that Schumann Study Center for European Studies indeed needs to be studying. Because even if a war doesn't happen, but an economic collapse happens, another depression happens, the collapse of American economy, the implications of it for Europe would be devastating. And many of the fundamental assumptions would have to be rethought. And they would not simply be secular assumptions. It would be theological discussion. Eschatology would have to be rethought. You will have to be rethinking whether Martin Luther was right that the Antichrist is going to come from Rome, or whether Luther was wrong and Protestant tradition has been wrong. Those issues would have to be honestly discussed and debated if a new Europe is to be built. Now, having a limited time, and the main purpose of this talk being introduction to my book, it's called The Book That Made Your World, How the Bible Created the Soul of Western Civilization. I should move to my book and talk less about Europe and not do the work that you are setting out to do in the next few years through the study center. This book should have been dedicated to Prabhu Gupta. I see Philip, I don't quite see Prabhu. Oh, he is there somewhere. Yes. This book should have been dedicated to him because for 40 years or so he has been my older brother and mentor, and for 12 years or so when I've been working on this book, he has been one constant, steady source of support and guidance. I chose to dedicate it to the Thomas Paine of India because I thought that Prabhu will agree with that. Arun Shori is a member of parliament. He was a minister in the militant Hindu party when it was ruling for several years, and he was head of the largest newspaper chain in India, and he's launched the fiercest attack in India against the Christian missions, not as an attempt to bless India, but as an attempt to subvert India, and fiercest attack on the Bible, that this is an irrational book, absurd book, full of absurdities and contradictions, were deserving only for the fools. So I've decided to dedicate this book to him since he did shake up the confidence of many Christians in India in the Word of God. So I'm really grateful to see Prabhu and also Oz, because Oz was one of the first who encouraged me to do this for a television series which has not yet happened. I began studying this question seriously because in 1980, the superintendent of police in my hometown, a district where I was working with the poor, invited me, sent a police inspector to bring me to his home, sat me on his mansion, which was colonial, spacious bungalow on the lawn, offered me tea and biscuits and other Indian snacks while he was on his telephone talking to police officers all over the district, ordering them. It was a phone with about 100 feet of wire, so he was walking around with his phone. There was no cordless phones in those days. And then he sat down across me after impressing me how powerful and strong a man he was, and told me that he had read all the reviews, great reviews of my first book on the Indian gurus, and he had heard so many elite in the district talk about me that I'm doing something for the poor which no one has done in the area before, and that how so many of these people were describing me as a jewel for our district. And then he said that, with all the due respect for who you are and what you're doing, I've called you here to ask you to cancel the prayer meeting that you have planned for next Wednesday. And I want you to understand that if you don't cancel it, I will personally kill you. Now, there was a contradiction in the way he was treating me and his staff was treating me and what he was telling me, so I couldn't take him seriously. And he understood that I am not taking him seriously. So he spent an hour telling me how many public figures he had killed in his long career as a police officer, with no trial, no judges, no courts involved, that he had personally killed. And he said that you really need to understand that if you don't cancel this prayer meeting, I will kill you. So I said, well, let me go and talk to my wife if it's okay with her to be a widow, and then I will decide. So I went home, talked about it, and prayed with her and with our community, and decided that there is a word above the word of man, above the word of kings and governments and officers, and we have to obey that word. We must do what we have to do, and the state can do what it wants to do and what it needs to do. Well, thankfully, the local press supported me, so he didn't actually kill me. I was just thrown in jail. And that raised the question, will he kill me when I come out, etc.? And those days in prison became an excellent time of retreat, where I was able to really think about how do you create a just and free and prosperous nation, and working with the poor, trying to change their destiny and poverty. How do you do that? What can I learn from the West at that time? Of course, I had assumed that the West was a civilized place which had successfully established the rule of law, where a police officer cannot simply kill a innocent public servant. Of course, some of that is changing now. When President Obama just had Osama bin Laden killed, he said that justice had been done. Well, it certainly was not civil justice. It was not even a just war. If Osama bin Laden had been shooting back and you kill him when he has a gun in his hand, that would be a just war. But he was unarmed in his bedroom. Was it right? Yes. Osama bin Laden launched a war, and the war killed him. So for President Obama to say that he launched an aggression, a war against us, and we took him out in war, that would be right and correct. But was it just? Was justice has been done? The problem is that universities such as Harvard can no longer talk about justice. The theory of just war is an invention of medieval theology here in Europe, in fact Eastern Europe, and North America. If you go down to St. Augustine, but Aquinas, but others. But it presupposes that there is a God whose law, whose word should rule, that right should rule over might. But while President Obama's action is right, even if it is not justice, it is right, what Britain and France are doing in Libya, killing kids of grandchildren of Muammar Gaddafi, I feel for them because my primary work these days is, my wife is full-time nanny and I'm her maid. That's how I spend most of my time, cleaning dishes and helping her in the kitchen and babysitting for our granddaughter. Is that, do you really have fig leaves? Is the Western mind now able to distinguish between justice and injustice? War, rules of war. James Cameron, in the film Avatar, shows the possible future of the world. until Cameron's film Avatar. Avatar is an Indian word which means incarnation. Before that, Hollywood heroes used to save the world from villains who came from outer space or from within this planet to destroy this earth. Now Cameron is saying the world will need an incarnation to save the world and outer space from America. That America would become the greatest terror for the earth. A greed-driven secular economy backed by a technologically invincible army would become the greatest terror of the earth. The Antichrist of the 20th century was given by Europe, by the first Protestant nation, Germany. Could America give the second Antichrist of the 21st century, the Antichrist of the 21st century? Cameron is saying, yes, it can, and it will. Unless you capture, unless there is an incarnation, a power which is more than human, because no political and military power can really stand up against America. So these are serious issues. I'm so glad that you are taking up the challenge to wrestle with these as a study center, as a think tank, to build a number of think tanks. And I'll tell you why studying it and thinking about is in fact the first primary responsibility before action. Because American evangelical theology would not be interested in these things. It is waiting for the Antichrist. Of course, the Antichrist is an invention of American eschatology. It's not a biblical idea. It's an invention of the American eschatology. It's waiting for rapture. That we have to be raptured, not build a peaceful, prosperous Europe which can transform Africa and Asia and other nations. That's the sort of a challenge which you are taking, and it will require very conscious decision to say, is this really God's mission? Did he actually mean it when he said, I will make you a great nation, and through you, I will make all the nations of the earth great? Is that what he wants to do? And in doing so, both Protestantism will have to change and Roman Catholicism will have to change. People like Robert Schuman will have to come to terms with understanding a biblical definition of what a nation is and what it would look like for the future, which I suspect it was a good thing that he didn't have it, but it's a weakness in Roman Catholicism that the reality is, before the Reformation, Catholicism gave unity to much of Europe. The Reformation broke it up. EU has now become an attempt by secular humanism, modernism, postmodernism to unite Europe on the basis of rationalism and economics. That is a problem. Secular humanism cannot sustain Europe simply because secularism cannot create a church. Secularism cannot even create a family. It cannot even sustain a family. The culture of entitlement, which will destroy American capitalism and the social security system, pension system, healthcare system, with the graying of Europe and graying of America, the ultimate answer to that is the fifth commandment: children, love your, honor your parents, your father and your mother. And I might talk about it in the next session in the evening. But that presupposes a view of family, of parents having children, nurturing children, and children honoring their father and mother, and where the church fits in. We don't have the time to go into that, but these are issues which secular humanism cannot sustain. The kind of economic system that has grown up, the welfare system of the last 60 years or so in America and in Europe, it must collapse. But if it has to be rebuilt, these issues, which have deep philosophical, theological, moral, ethical issues, have to be thought through. So what is my vision for human center shaping, becoming a voice in the next 7 years? I think 7 years from now, in 2017, when you celebrate the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, by that time, the battle for the soul of Europe will be really on. The soul of Europe will be up for grab. Who will shape the soul of Europe? What will constitute? Where will the DNA, the core philosophical ideas, ethical ideas, moral ideas, political ideas, philosophy of war and justice and everything else, where will it come from? Now, it's not enough for the church to be teaching biblical worldview, evangelizing. Luther was not teaching biblical worldview. When he nailed the 95 Theses on the Castle Church of Wittenberg, he was not just teaching dictums like justification by faith alone, or grace alone, or scriptures alone. He was challenging everything that his university was teaching, that all the universities in Europe were teaching, what church was teaching, what the state believed. He was challenging them. And in these next 7 years, as your think tanks work, you have got to muster up the courage to take on your rivals, nail your thesis, and I think it has to be done on the internet. My proposal is a kind of a Wikipedia where everything that every professor is teaching in Europe is put on your Wikipedia, and students are simply explained what's wrong with what these professors are teaching and the universities is teaching, what kind of questions you should raise, and what the truth is, how to discuss and find the truth. Imagine a classroom 7 years from now, where a professor is giving a lecture on economics or banking or history or whatever, and a student is on his cell phone or iPad already listening to the same lecture which the same professor had given the previous year, and listening to comments from your think tank of what kind of questions to ask the professor. So he is on the next paragraph, before the professor has given his paragraph, raises his hand and asks the questions and challenges the professor because he has... Now that's the sort of thing which Luther did, which fired up students to question the wisdom of the universities. Is this true? Now that's the sort of thing this book is doing. And that's what I would propose to you as a challenge to Human Study Center for European Studies, that if in 7 years you want to be a force contending for the soul of Europe, that you create an intellectual revolution where every student in every class can begin to demolish secular thought, pagan thought, postmodern thought in every classroom, and become very difficult for students, but then has access to what really the truth is and how to build a great Europe in order to become a blessing to the whole world. Thank you.